Okay, so we are excited to be here today to present the second installment in our four-part series on teletherapy. Today, we are going to talk about legal and ethical considerations regarding teletherapy and offer some practical resources for all disciplines and information on privacy and ethical standards. We will have the main instructional portion of the workshop, and then we'll follow up with some time for question and answer. And you will be given instructions towards the end of the workshop to complete the webinar survey and the post-workshop exam so that you can get your certificate of attendance. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Be sure to have your participant worksheet available so that you can follow along with us. And I'll put that in the chat here in just a moment. Feel free to use the chat to comment or ask questions, and we do have the Q&A box available as well. We will be asking you to respond several times in the chat box because we want to make this really as interactive as we can. I know we all learn better when we can use different senses to understand information. And we also encourage you to put questions in the chat, but we'll definitely have time to answer any questions. We do want you to know that you can turn on closed captioning for this webinar, and there is a closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom screen that will enable that function. And just so you're aware, this webinar is recorded for on-demand viewing. Only the presenters will be on screen, and the chat is not included in that as well. So please feel free to ask any questions and know that those will only be coming to those of us who are here live today. If you were not able to download that participant worksheet earlier, I'm going to put the link into the chat here in just a second. But to get the most out of this workshop, use those participation pages to take notes and complete the activities that we have planned for us to do together. And finally, be active in discussions in the group chat, and so that we can get to know each other and really have some good communication today. So to start building that community, let's go ahead and get to know each other a little bit. For those of you who are not a part of our clinician community, we're so happy that you are here. eLuma was founded in 2011 by our current CEO, Jeremy Glauser. At eLuma, we are on a mission to provide better support for schools so that you can create more success stories with students. eLuma connects students and educators with clinicians who care, and we also provide software solutions to support mental health, speech therapy, OT, PT, and school psychology. So now we'd like to introduce ourselves. Today, Melissa Torres will help in monitoring the chat for us. She will keep track of questions in the chat and add any helpful links that you may need. My name is Cami Bible. I've been in OT for almost 25 years, actually 25 years this month. And I have worked in about every setting that you can work in, including inpatient rehab, acute care, SNF, but I've spent most of my career in the schools. And I also have 8 years of experience doing teletherapy. I was a contractor with eLuma as well, prior to coming to my current role as clinical services team lead.
And hello, I'm Pola Morrison. I've been a school psychologist for about 25 years as well in the brick and mortar setting, and then most recently as a virtual school psychologist with eLuma. In the past, I've been an adjunct instructor in school counseling and psychometric assessment. My background is in early childhood education, and I've also worked with adults with disabilities at the university level. Currently, I'm the mental health specialist on the clinical services team here at eLuma.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Sarah Plunkett. I've been a speech-language pathologist for 15 years. Like Cami and Pola, have experience in a variety of settings, including acute care, inpatient and outpatient rehabilitation, home health, skilled nursing, public school settings, and also teletherapy. Contracted with eLuma for 2 years as a clinician prior to transitioning to my clinical services specialist role.
So let's start with who we've got with us today. So we've got a poll here. Let us know, which is your discipline? Are you a mental health provider, an OT, or a PT, speech therapist, school psychologist, administrator, or other?
Looks like we've got a good mix here today.
Good mix is right, yes.
Yeah, that's a little bit different demographic than we have had in the past. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and push that out and share those results.
Okay, so we'd also like to know where everyone is working too. Are you at a public school, a charter school, a private school, or you don't work in the schools? Let's see where everybody's at. Okay. Lots of public schools. Okay.
Great.
Some charter school, private school.
We'd also like to know the primary grades you work with. We've got our options there, so let us know what grades you work with.
Oh yeah, early, a lot of early grades.
Good mixes here as well.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, we'd like you to rate your knowledge of teletherapy. Awesome.
Yeah, great mix.
All right.
Well, welcome again, everyone, to our second webinar, Legal and Ethical Considerations in Teletherapy. This is the second installment of our 4-part teletherapy bootcamp. Just a disclosure here, all presenters are affiliated with eLuma Online Therapy Services, a provider of school-based teletherapy services. Presenters do not endorse nor receive any compensation for any products or services included in this presentation. Pre-approved continuing education credits are not offered for this webinar. However, all attendees will receive a certificate of attendance via email, and you can submit this information to your licensing boards for approval. Another reminder here, this webinar is for educational purposes only. Nothing in this presentation constitutes any legal advice, so please refer to your LEA for legal policy and procedures.
So here's what we're going to learn today, and you can find these outcomes in your handout. As an engaged participant, this is the knowledge you'll walk away with. You'll be able to identify 2 key teletherapy resources for ethical practices. You will identify practices to ensure HIPAA and FERPA compliance. And you'll be able to demonstrate an understanding of appropriate licensure and certification for teletherapy. So let's get started. We have a lot of information to cover today, and we want to make sure that we have time to cover it all and answer your questions that you may have. Let's start with information on HIPAA, FERPA, and COPPA.
So we just heard that wonderful acronym salad that Pola mentioned, HIPAA, FERPA, and COPPA. And we want to go over what the differences are and what they mean to those of us who are working in school-based areas. We'll start with a brief review of HIPAA. HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which was enacted in 1996. The latest update was about 20 years ago in April of 2023. It is a federal law that required a national standard to protect the sensitive health information of a patient and prevent distribution of that information without the patient's consent or knowledge. This is specific to health and medical information. And the best way to remember what HIPAA requires is through 3 basic rules. First, we have the privacy rule, and each of us has a right to privacy. So this rule restricts the release of our medical records without consent, and any information that is identifiable to a specific individual is what is restricted. An individual must authorize in writing for any medical identifiable information to be released and to a specific entity. And in some instances, it's for a specific amount of time, depending on what that entity is. The second rule is the security rule. And this rule sets the standard for protecting or securing patient electronic and physical information. Any organization that maintains or holds this information must also secure that information. And this includes securing confidentiality, protecting against improper use, protecting the patient against potential threats, training staff and employees about compliance factors, and adopting policies and procedures to meet those securing standards. Third is the breach or enforcement rule. And this is what happened. This is the rule that tells us what we need to do if security of information is breached. If this occurs, the Department of Health and Human Services must be notified as soon as possible and definitely no later than 60 days of that breach. An immediate announcement of a privacy breach is required, and the Office of Civil Rights may impose fines if the entity does not comply with this. However, the entity can demonstrate that identifiable information has not been compromised, and in that case, they would not have to choose that they don't have to send out a notification. Additionally, the Federal Privacy Act of 1974 now also follows those HIPAA guidelines for federal agencies and contractors. And this means if the entity, like a school or college that receives federal monies, must also comply with this act. FERPA stands for the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and this was enacted to protect the privacy of student education records. So basically, schools must have written consent to release any information from a student's educational record. Students may disclose these records without consent, schools may disclose these records without consent to the following: school officials with legitimate educational interests, other schools where a student may be transferring, officials for audit or evaluation purposes, appropriate officials in conjunction to financial aid, an accrediting organization, or to comply with a judicial order or subpoena, and authorities with the juvenile judicial system. These rights will transfer to the student when they reach the age of 18 or when they attend school beyond a high school level. As stated on the federal DOE website, schools may disclose without consent a directory of information, which may include student name, address, telephone, date of birth, places of birth, awards received, and dates of attendance. However, in order to do that, schools must notify parents and students annually about their rights under FERPA and allow a reasonable amount of time to request that the school not disclose any directory information about them. And then lastly, COPPA. There's some debate about whether this is COPPA or COPPA, and we looked at all the different YouTube videos, and guess what? People pronounce it differently. So you may hear us going back and forth. We decided on COPPA. So COPPA states the requirements of website or online services to children under the age of 13 and the operators or providers of that online service or website. And this was enacted in 1998. This requires that the online service provider or website owner secure any personal identifiable information of children under the age of 13. And that includes on message boards, in emails, and in chat rooms. In our first webinar, we referred to this when sending links to students. So some things to think about with regard to students is not to post any links to your therapy session on public-facing domains or websites. They need to be sent directly to the student or caregiver's email through a secure encrypted email service. Any personal information, including email addresses and first names, telephone numbers, social security numbers, home addresses, must be kept secure and not accessible to the public. So this includes password protecting anything that isn't included within a secure email, like attachments and things like that. Assigned parent consent must be received before sharing any information electronically.
So the federal DOE does provide online FERPA 101 training for LEAs on their website. This information is included in your handout, but we wanted to go over a couple of frequently asked questions from that training. The first one, does HIPAA apply to an elementary or secondary school? Generally, no, because the school is not a HIPAA covered entity. It does not transfer health information or engage in billing a health plan electronically. Schools may maintain health information only in student health records, vision, hearing screenings, for an example, that are education records under FERPA. And the second one here, how does FERPA apply to the health records of students maintained by elementary or secondary schools? Student immunization and other health records maintained by districts, even those within a school-operated clinic, are education records and are subject to FERPA. Therefore, parents have the right under FERPA to inspect and also review these health and medical records because they are education records. So now we're going to move on to test our knowledge a little bit on some of this information. So the first question here, HIPAA and FERPA are interchangeable terms, true or false? You guys are quick.
Great job.
You got it too. Looking for
100%.
faults there. And our second question, FERPA rights transfer to the student at age 18 or if the student attends school beyond the high school level or when the student moves out.
Great work.
Awesome. Yeah, if the student attends school beyond the high school level.
Each of these national organizations offers guidance on ethical practice in teletherapy services. We'll review each one in the following section. The National Association of School Psychologists provides a guidance document on telehealth virtual service delivery. In the section titled Legal and Ethical Implications, there are specific areas to consider, including informed consent, applicable laws, liability, and due process. In the technology section, it states, student privacy and confidentiality are paramount concerns with telehealth. Currently, providers tend to use video conferencing software for most services. Practitioners must ensure that these technological platforms use appropriate encryption when transmitting data. This can be very hard for the average practitioner to verify on their own. Other security measures should be in place to protect student information and dispose of data properly.
And the American Speech-Language Hearing Association statement reads, telepractice services must conform to professional standards, including but not limited to the Code of Ethics, our scope of practice, professional policy documents, and other relevant federal, state, and institutional policies and requirements.
And AOTA does not have one specific statement, but they have released different positions on this. Occupational therapy practitioners must consider the unique features of service delivery using telecommunication methods and how they relate to the client or client extenders. And they also state that all school-based practitioners must comply with applicable laws, regulations, and standards and guidelines, which includes the LEA policies, as well as those FERPA and COPPA policies. So we have another test your knowledge question here. And again, you can follow along with these in your handout. And just kind of a teaser, you may see some of these later in your post-tests. So they are important to go ahead and pay attention to. So this question, national organizations and state licensing boards for mental health, speech-language pathology, and occupational physical therapies offer statements and guidelines for ethics in teletherapy. True or false?
Everyone's quick.
Yeah, they are quick. And you are also very correct. The answer is true.
Great job, everyone. When the COVID-19 pandemic closed many schools and businesses, remote or virtual services began to increase. There was a learning curve for everyone. These tips for a secure video conference are from the Office of Ethics at UC Berkeley and very applicable to your virtual practice. Do not post meeting IDs or links in public forums, and monitoring attendees supports the guidance under COPPA. Being mindful of others in your background, as well as an appropriate background, will assist in maintaining FERPA compliance, as well as allow your student to focus on the session. And by being consistent with Zoom updates, this will ensure that a secure connection remains in place. When sharing your screen, be mindful of any other information on your computer that you may accidentally share. And lastly, if you see signs of possible Zoom bombing, you can select the security option in the menu bar and choose Suspend Participant Activities to remove unwanted visitors. So let's test your knowledge. Tips for securing video conferencing include appropriate virtual backgrounds, private conferencing links, monitoring for unwanted participants, protecting confidential data, or all of the above. Wow, y'all are quick. Great work. And you're right, all of the above. Good job, everyone. Next one, Zoom offers security assistance for unwanted participants, allows hosts to remove unwanted participants, true or false? Wow, also quick. Excellent, great work, everyone. Yes, you're correct. It is true.
So now we're going to look a little deeper into privacy issues here with a case study. In this case study, we've got Jake. Jake is a 7-year-old student with speech and language deficits. His teacher has voiced concerns over his ability to answer comprehension questions in his classroom and also his ability to follow multi-step directions. She also stated she has difficulty overall understanding his speech. Jake is in foster care currently and is in the process of being adopted by his foster parents. Jake's biological mother is not allowed to have contact with him. However, she frequently calls the school in an attempt to gain information. A request for screening was sent home with Jake and also signed by his foster parents. They agreed to formal testing and the development of his programming and initial IEP in order for him to receive services within his school environment. However, Jake's biological mother continues to call the school requesting information on report cards and other school services. So we'd like to take a few moments just to reflect on this information in this study. We'd love to hear from you guys in the chat, share your thoughts. What privacy issues stand out? What do you think the school staff should do to protect the students' privacy? We'd love to hear from you in the chat.
Or maybe these are some things that your staff is currently doing.
I got a message that the chat is disabled. Let me
Thank you, Pamela, for letting us know that.
fix that. Yeah. Let's see, I can send to everyone. Let me. Okay, there we go. Let's see, that should fix it. Okay, great. So now you've had a little bit of time to pause and reflect on that. Go ahead and share what.
So again, just thinking about some of the privacy issues that stood out to you hearing this information, and what do you think the school staff should do to ensure they are protecting the student? We've got FERPA considerations, absolutely.
what kind of training should be provided?
You guys have some great thoughts here.
Yes, excellent, especially with the foster and biological.
And training and kind of staff referring, to other entities as needed. That's always important. Staff should look to what the court has ordered. Absolutely. You guys have some great thoughts here. So thank you guys for that and all that participation. We're going to move into considerations for licensure and also credentialing. So we'll review guidance within the following disciplines. We're going to look at mental health, speech and language, and occupational therapy. So we're going to kick it off with school psychology. The National Association of School Psychologists provides the following statement. Despite the lack of uniform reciprocity, school psychologists must be credentialed or licensed in the state where they reside and also where they are providing services. For example, let's say that John Smith is a school psychologist in Georgia and is also credentialed to provide services in Georgia. He's also credentialed or licensed in California as he provides school psychology services online. Each state has specific requirements to practice school psychology in the schools, so it's important to refer to the credentialing office for each state. Efforts are underway to create a school psych pact, similar to the Psych Pact for clinical psychologists. The National Association of School Psychologists, NASP, provides national certification that may facilitate the process for cross-state licensing.
School counselors are typically credentialed through the State Department of Education, and similar to school psychologists, will need to be credentialed in the state they reside and the state in which they provide services. Some school counselors are also licensed professional counselors or LPCs and may have additional licensing through a state's mental health or behavioral sciences board. They also have to be licensed in the state they reside as well as in the state they are providing services. The American School Counselor Association can provide additional guidance. All states require LPCs to pass a comprehensive examination on counseling practice. Unlike school counselors, the LPC endorsements are through a state governing board. The state board information is available on the National Board of Certified Counselors directory. Social worker is a little more specific as there's various types of social workers. For purposes of this webinar, we'll focus on LCSWs and LMSWs. States vary on the requirements for school social work, and even some districts will vary on the placement of LCSWs over LMSWs. As in any other discipline, social workers must be licensed in their home state and in the state they provide services. The School Social Work Association of America defines school social workers as a social worker specifically trained in schools. Additional resources regarding the role of school social workers can be found on their website. The National Association of Social Workers, NASW, provides a national credentialing system that certifies social workers to meet high standards set by the NASW. They also provide a state-by-state comparison of licensing requirements, and we've provided that link in your handout. Each state has its own set of requirements for state licensing, and you can find these through the state's licensing board. The Multidiscipline Licensure Research Project is a great tool to find licensing boards for each state. Socialwork.org provides additional information on licensing requirements by state, along with the links to the state boards. For military members and their spouses, as of January 6th of this year, the Veterans Auto and Education Improvement Act of 2022 was signed into law. And this means that licensed social workers can now receive reciprocal licensing in states outside their home state, which is very helpful for cross-state licensing.
So we've got some ASHA guidance here, the Audiology and Speech-Language Pathology Interstate Compact. ASLP-IC, got another good acronym for us here, is an occupational licensure compact that allows professionals to practice in multiple states without obtaining those additional state licenses. Before the compact can issue privileges to practice, the ASLP-IC Commission, which is responsible for all oversight, must create required rules and bylaws and implement a data system between states. This work is currently ongoing, so the compact is expected to be fully implemented sometime this year, 2023. Currently, this is enacted in 23 states, though. And as far as impacts, first we're going to look at some benefits to the public. Benefits include continuity of care, the portability for military spouses, similar to what Pola mentioned, with social work, which is so important. Access and choice of providers. It does facilitate teletherapy, simplifies and improves processes, and addresses barriers to access that many of our students experience. Some impacts for professionals and providers. This includes that audiologists and speech-language pathologists, they're going to certify that we've met these acceptable standards of practice, promote cooperation between compact states in the areas of licensure and also regulation, and offers a higher degree of consumer protection across state lines. Licensed audiologists and SLPs will be able to practice in person or through telepractice across state lines via the privilege to practice. And the ASLP-IC will increase access to care and also will facilitate continuity of care, as we mentioned before. Providers will be able to provide these services to populations that are currently underserved or geographically isolated, as well as we mentioned, allowing the military personnel and their spouses to maintain their professions when relocating. And here's just a great visual. You can see the current status of this compact across the United States.
Okay, for occupational therapy is currently working to create an OT licensure compact. Currently, though, most states require that the practitioner is licensed in the state where the OT practices and also in the state where the student resides or is visiting. AOTA has a great chart of each state and their current regulations for interstate practice, and you can find this in the resources section of your participation worksheet. The Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact is an interstate compact, or will be an interstate compact, or a formal agreement among states that facilitates interstate practice of occupational therapy, and it is expected to begin accepting applications for privileges in 2024. Under this compact, occupational therapists and occupational therapy assistants who are licensed and in good standing in a compact member state may practice in another compact member state via that compact privilege, which is equivalent to a license. And I do have a link to one of the most recent meetings regarding the OT compact. It's a video and it's in the resources section of your participation worksheet again. And for physical therapy, physical therapy does have a currently active compact, and there are many states that are actively issuing and accepting compact privileges. Many states do require that the clinician pass a jurisprudence exam along with paying a fee for that privilege. So we have another couple of test your knowledge questions coming up. This first question is the audiology and speech-language pathology interstate compact is a licensure compact that allows for clinicians to practice in one state or multiple states. Great, and you guys are paying attention. That is multiple states.
Good job.
Okay, and one more here. Let's see. There we go. Legislation for interstate compacts across multiple disciplines is currently enacted in all 50 states. True or false? Hopefully there will come a time when this is true. However, you guys are correct. This is currently false. You can refer to those links that we have in your participation worksheet to find out more about licensure compacts in your area. So we do have just a couple of case studies here that we want to go through. This can be really tricky sometimes to determine who can practice where and when, and especially most recently through COVID and the pandemic, a lot of different things were happening. So this scenario is a scenario that many OT practitioners faced during COVID as schools closed to in-person services. We have a student David, who was receiving OT through his brick and mortar school in Idaho. And during the pandemic, David and his family went to live with his grandmother in Washington State. And we saw this happening a lot. Families were moving out of the cities and into different states to join family members so that they could shelter in place with other family. But in this scenario, David's brick and mortar school wanted the occupational therapist, who also resides in Idaho, to continue his weekly services. And many schools expected OT practitioners to continue services who had temporarily moved out of state. And it was really confusing because it's a little bit different for teachers who could continue to educate those students. However, if we take a look at the AOTA chart for states telehealth information, if we looked at that, we would find that Idaho does not have a specific position on whether out-of-state OTs can see a student who is living or visiting in a different state. However, Washington State's Administrative Code, or WACS, state that an occupational therapist or occupational therapy assistant using telehealth to provide teletherapy to patients in Washington must be licensed to provide occupational therapy in Washington. So they must be licensed in that state. So therefore, this OT practitioner could not continue to see David unless she also was licensed in Washington State. So it's a good idea to always check directly with your state licensure board, as well as referencing that AOTA chart. That's a great place to start and get an idea of what the states may be doing. But through the pandemic, we saw a lot of these regulations change, and some of them were only temporary changes. I know there were a lot like in the Northeast where the states are smaller. And so it's pretty typical that someone may live or work or transfer to a different state pretty easily. And so I know there were a lot of temporary regulations that were passed in that area of the US to accommodate for that. But a lot of those are expiring now. So you want to make sure that not only do you check your, that AOTA guide, or for any license, you would want to make sure that you're checking the state licensure, and maybe each time an occurrence would happen, because it does change frequently, or it can change frequently.
Okay, in this case study, we're going to review licensing concerns regarding cross-state services. Susan, who lives in West Virginia and receives counseling services via Zoom from a social worker who lives in Georgia. Her social worker is licensed in West Virginia as well as Georgia, so there's no concern with her ability to meet those licensing requirements. However, Susan's going on vacation out of state, and she does not want to miss a session. The ability to temporarily provide services is a common concern when practicing across state borders. The answer is not clear and largely depends on individual states' requirements, and these requirements are updated regularly, just as Cami mentioned. In this scenario, Susan's going to Florida, and her social worker is not licensed in Florida. While some mental health professionals, like licensed psychologists, they have a psych pack, and counselors, they have a counseling compact in 2024, they can expedite the licensing requirement and provide those services. Mental health providers who are military members or spouses also have expedited cross-state licensing. However, some states do provide temporary licenses, like Florida. At this time, their law states, quote, No person shall be required to be licensed, provisionally licensed, registered, or certified who is not a resident of the state, but offers services in this state for no more than 15 days in any calendar year. And the non-resident is licensed or certified to practice the services provided by another state, end quote. So this is a provision currently provided in Florida, but we find that these regulations do change regularly. So right now, Susan's social worker can provide those services to Susan while she's in Florida for a week. This would also apply if she was receiving services from a licensed psychologist or licensed counselor. These do not apply to school psychologists as they're credentialed through the State Department of Education. And at this time, they do not have a cross-state pact like the LPs and LPCs. A state-by-state survey of telemental health laws was conducted by a law firm called Epstein, Becker, and Green. So they offer updates to these many different regulations and laws. Their app is available for free, and we've just posted a picture of what that looks like. So you can check on those just to see what the changes are. Okay, so let's take a look at our tester knowledge. National organizations use licensing boards for mental health, speech and language pathology, occupational therapy. Am I reading the right one?
You're good. I think the poll just has the national organizations in
okay.
front of that.
Occupational therapy and physical therapy offer guidance on compacts which facilitate interstate practice. True or false? Hopefully that's on the poll right. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, quick, before I could even finish the sentence. Great job. Excellent work, everyone.
All right, now we're going to move into some additional resources here. Just as an FYI, these national organizations offer additional guidance regarding ethical practices in telehealth, teletherapy. Membership in these organizations might be required. Again, this information will be on the resources section of your participation worksheet. Interesting facts and kind of information regarding privacy and phone numbers. To secure the privacy of your phone number, some platforms like Zoom offer a Zoom phone number. Google Voice is actually a Google app that will protect your personal phone number for calls that you need to make. Lastly, be sure to understand your district's confidentiality policies regarding signed releases and consent forms, something all practitioners are dealing with a lot. Some districts will accept those electronic signatures, but some will require electronic and hard copy forms there. So now we're going to test your knowledge again. Gave you guys a brief break, but Google Voice offers protection for, would it be phone numbers or addresses? You guys got it.
Good job.
Google Voice will offer protection for your phone number. And this is a little bit longer here. We've got some choices. Which of the following are considerations regarding ethics and confidentiality? Consent, privacy, confidentiality, or all of the above? You guys got it. These are all considerations we need to think about with ethics and confidentiality here. Perfect. So we're going to pull out that participation worksheet now. We're going to take a few minutes to reflect on these considerations. We've thought a lot about ethics, confidentiality. We'd love to hear what you come up with in the chat. So what areas in your practice will you improve on with increased knowledge of consent, privacy, and confidentiality? Hopefully we've given you a lot to think about in these areas.
Take a couple minutes to write those down on your participation worksheet and then share out what you have come up with in the chat. I think it's so easy now to just send an email or create a document and put information on it and share that out, that we really do need to make sure that we're considering where that information could go and using password protection. Google doesn't do it natively, but depending on your system, should be secured. If you're using like your school, any school account that's associated with Google is going to be encrypted and secured for FERPA and COPPA. But if you have to send something, consider using password protection on that document. You can password protect spreadsheets and Word documents from within Microsoft Office. So those are some great things to use. Also, if you have a Mac, PDFs that are sent through Preview can be password protected that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Sandra, I love this, taking care to always be mindful of the student's privacy in many areas of their lives. Yeah, that's a great point.
Absolutely.
A lot to think about for sure,
to,
as Cammie mentioned, with these issues with, school-based services for sure.
Or even I know sometimes it's easy to text a parent to check in and see how things are going, but really considering, what type of app you're using for that, or, making sure that if you're on a personal phone, that there's no way that anyone would be able to access any information like that.
I know for those of you practicing virtually, sorry, I just thought of something with Sandra's comment about privacy. I actually had a student who was receiving virtual counseling, and parent admittedly was very busy and wanted to do it in the car on their way to practice. And parent was all good with it. Parent's like, yeah, we'll do the counseling in the car. But I could tell that the student was very hesitant to have her session in the car on the phone with everybody else in the car. So it's something that, I know moms get really busy. It didn't occur to her that it would be a privacy issue for the student, but that's something as a practitioner, you could point that out. So that's something to think about. Thanks, Sandra, for that comment.
Absolutely. We've got some other great ones here for just being careful online, thinking about, COPPA, children's personal info, reviewing school practices for acquiring parental consent and confidentiality, and of course, keeping Zoom updated, as we mentioned. Those are all really great things to mention. Yeah, I know,
COPPA isn't something that we hear a lot about. I know for many years, even just working in the schools, it wasn't something that you hear all the time. We always hear about FERPA and we hear about HIPAA, even though it doesn't really apply fully to schools and the information in the education system. But COPPA is something to definitely consider, because think of all the different games and the online websites that our students are using or that we might be using in our sessions, and what does that look like? What's the security like on that websites, and so definitely some things to consider. Well, we have covered a lot of information today, and you can take a look back at the outcomes that we reviewed at the beginning of the workshop in your handout. But so today we talked about identifying key teletherapy resources for ethical practice. We talked about HIPAA, FERPA, and COPPA compliance. And you can now demonstrate an understanding of appropriate licensure and certifications that are required for teletherapy. So next, we are going to invite you to take a workshop survey. And one of the questions will ask you how well this workshop has prepared you to achieve each of these outcomes. So let's wrap up, and we'll share information on how to access that survey here next. So I'm going to put in the chat a link to the survey. And if you click that link, it'll take you to the workshop evaluation and the post-test. So you'll complete the evaluation first, and then the post-test will pop up. You will receive a certificate of attendance if you complete and pass that post-test at 80%, and you can retake those questions if you need to. And that will be emailed to you within 48 hours. If you do have any questions, feel free to email us at clinicalservices@elumatherapy.com, and we will be happy to answer any questions. We will also stick around to give you time to complete these steps and answer any questions that you might have. And just an upcoming advertisement for our next two webinars. We will be presenting the first two webinars live, as well as the next two installments of those the webinars, which will cover teletherapy strategies and a deeper dive into teletherapy sessions. So those will be coming up this fall. If you want to watch our first webinar, and then this webinar will also be posted on our website at eLuma.com. Any questions that you all have, please feel free to put those in the chat, or you can use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Again, we're happy to stick around to answer any questions. If you don't have any questions, thank you so much for attending today. We loved having you here, and we provided you with the knowledge that you need to understand ethical and legal implications of teletherapy, the licensure and certification required for teletherapy, and resources to comply with HIPAA, FERPA, and COPPA regulations. Just remember that in order to receive your certificate, you do need to complete the survey and answer those 10 questions on that post-test.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you very much for
attending. We do hope you'll join
Yes.
us for our next two.
Thanks for joining us. And we appreciate all the comments in the chat. Thanks for participating.
That was good information today. Good. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thanks, Pam.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Betsy.
Right, and again, once you have completed that survey and evaluation, you are free to go. Seeing a few drop off, but we still have several left in there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop.